Time for the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. Tell us some of the stories, please.
Well, Max, let's start with this one. Congratulations to enemies of box office futures. Cantor Fitzgerald has laid off its entire staff. Who are the enemies identified in the headline by Joe Wiesenthal at Business Insider? You, Max Keiser.
That's correct. I am fighting the borrowers and the speculators. As part of the war of savers versus speculators, Cantor Fitzgerald and Cantor Exchange are part of the enemy. They're borrowers and speculators. And I mobilized my media empire, just like any good media mogul should. And I defeated the speculators, and the MPAA and Congress have outlawed these contracts. And I have an idea what could be done with these contracts, and I'll mention that in a moment, but please continue.
Max, well, you did mention media moguls. I have a headline about a media mogul. Reporter bribing Viacom chairman Sumner Redstone blew $500,000 on his younger girl group crush object. This is the 87-year-old chairman of both Viacom, a $20 billion company, and CBS, a $10 billion company, Sumner Redstone. And he contacted this journalist from the Daily Beast, Peter Loria, and he's trying to force him to give him information about who was his source for a story in which they revealed that Sumner Redstone's chasing a young girl from a all-girl band, Electric Barbarellas. So listen to this audio clip here.
I know you may be reluctant. We have to have the name of the person who gave you that story. Up in the New York Post. We're not going to kill him. Just want to talk to him. We're not going to hurt this guy. We want to sit him down and find out why he did it.
Sumner Redstone in the house doing the whole media mafioso thing. I blame Viagra for this. How old is this guy?
87. But Max, you did warn when you were campaigning against the Cantor Exchange, box office futures, you warned of this sort of activity, that these sort of guys could do it just to manipulate the price of their movie project, their movie contract. This is just a case of him wanting to get this young girl onto a reality television show on MTV.
That's right. Okay, Hollywood box office is about $10 billion a year. Now, using derivative contracts, you could leverage that up to $200 billion a year. And then you could move the price of movies in ways you want them to move, and you could get movies produced that you want to see produced. So here's my idea. Let's take a country like Russia with an active exchange and derivatives market of their own. They could effectively trade box office futures contracts in Russia, get a $200 or $300 billion exchange going, and bid up prices of movies that had a good view of Russia and sell short those projects that had a negative view that they didn't want to see produced. They could control the Hollywood dream factory right here from Moscow.
Well, Russians do play the bad guys in most films, so maybe they could intervene there. But let's talk about movies. Goldman Sachs is making a movie about itself. Goldman, the movie, by Goldman.
Wow, this brings up interesting questions about casting. I think for Lloyd Blankfein, the CEO, how about Divine from those John Waters movies? Remember she was in Polyester? I think we bring her out of retirement and make her play Lloyd Blankfein in the epic movie version of Goldman Sachs, How to Steal a Country.
I have a much better idea. He was an actor. He then was a prime minister. Now he's a banker. Tony Blair. He has started out as an actor. He has the God complex.
That's right.
And he's a banker at J.P. Morgan.
He's got the chops. He fooled the entire nation into thinking that labor was not just the, how shall I call it, the placenta of Maggie Thatcher's neo-conservatism.
Goldman Sachs is financing this film about themselves. It's only for internal distribution, and the star is Lloyd Blankfein. Goldman Sachs is in the next headline as well. An AIG failure would have cost Goldman Sachs, documents show. Yes, apparently Goldman Sachs was forced to reveal who they allegedly insured themselves against an AIG collapse. It turns out, according to Christopher Whalen, Managing Director at Institutional Risk Analytics, this illustrates that Goldman's version of reality is not entirely accurate. They did have exposure to AIG, and that is what drove their behavior in the bailout. I'm sure one day we'll hear the equivalent of the Sumner Redstone audio files, the telephone messages. We'll hear the same from Lloyd Blankfein. We're not going to kill the markets. We're just going to need your money.
This is so sad, because when Hank Paulson went before Congress and demanded $700 billion as part of that amazing extortion racket, where he threatened martial law in America unless Congress gave him $700 billion for Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs at the time said, well, we don't need the money because we're hedged. Now it turns out they weren't hedged, and he was operating as an extortionist for Goldman, his buddy, and he is operating for the banks and not on behalf of the American people, because there was a coup in America in 2008, and it's now run by corrupt bankers.
Here's what Senator Chuck Grassley says. It's as if the New York Fed used AIG as a frontman to bail out big banks all over the world. It took nearly 2 years for the public to learn these details, and they were only revealed because Congress wouldn't take no for an answer. Taxpayers deserve to know what happened with their money.
Yeah, I mean, they should have had Sumner Redstone go in front of Congress to get the $700 billion for Wall Street and Goldman Sachs. He could have said, Sumner Redstone could be like, give me the money, I won't whack you. I won't whack you, but I need the money, and I need it fast. Okay, I'm Sumner Redstone. I own a media empire. I need the money quick, and I won't whack you.
But all these details, obviously the New York Fed was a frontman. It is a frontman. That's its role. But it ties in with this whole Cantor exchange and all these Goldman making a movie. Really, Martin Scorsese needs to direct it. It's going to be his epic last film of the mafia film of all mafia films.
Yes, well, we did see a preview of the new film coming out by the editor and director of Wall Street Part 1. Of course, that would be the
Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone, of course. He's coming out with Wall Street Part 2. Money Never Sleeps.
Yeah, but I'm talking about whacking and killing and murdering and assassinations, and it's either Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese have to direct this.
Abel Ferrara. He made the movie The Bad Lieutenant. Get him to make the movie about Goldman Sachs. Guy's getting knifed.
Well, speaking of violence, this is in the next headline. BP's head rolls. Oh, yes, the head of BP, Tony Hayward, is out with a £10 million pension.
Of course.
By the way, he's another person that could be played by Tony Blair.
Oh, absolutely.
They look almost the same.
They have that smarmy Tory look.
Apparently, it's so insulting. It's very Leo Straussian. It's very condescending, because what they're going to do is replace him with Robert Dudley, and they're openly saying it's because he has an American accent, and the people will take an American accent in a better way.
That's right. Well, George Bush proved that you could fool the American people into accepting anything if you sounded dumb enough, and you sounded deep South enough, and Texas enough. So he said, look, George Bush, we're going to completely destroy your economy, and you're now left with nothing. And everyone bought into it. Now you've got Tony Hayward who's got that kind of British accent, and of course everyone's like, oh no, it's foreign, we don't accept it. So they put in an American. What's his name? Dudley?
Robert Dudley.
Robert Dudley. So he'll get on there for BP and say, well, the Gulf of Mexico is completely destroyed. We totally eviscerated a big part of your economy, and we're occupying your country, and you're all a bunch of peasants now, but got an American accent, so it's okay. And everyone will be like, yay, 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 we're peasants.
I feel like I could have a beer with him. Well, this, however, they're going to have an American accent to explain to the population of America, which is suddenly interested in BP's role in the release of al-Megrahi, the Lockerbie bomber. Remember, as we discussed in the last episode, Tony Blair and the Farting Camels of Tripoli.
Farting Camels of Tripoli, starring Lloyd Blankfein, as played by Define.
Well, the headline reads, BP to drill off coast of Libya. Yes, BP and his Libyan partner, the Libya Investment Corporation, signed an exploration agreement worth $900 million with Libya's national oil company in 2007, when Tony Blair was there.
Well, blood for oil. Tony Blair, blood for oil. Tony, blood for oil, Blair. How many Americans died in the accident? 190? Well, now BP's got a good oil contract, so they didn't die in vain.
Now that he has an American accent, that's all it takes.
It's all that's matter. They're dead now, but BP got a big contract, so it's okay.
Well, speaking of British accents, Vince Cable, who is with the Lib Dems, and remember, he was very prominent during the financial crisis because he was the only voice of reason in the House of Commons, and he is now in the headlines, banks told lend more or lose bonuses. So Vince Cable, the business secretary under this coalition government in the UK, has announced that he's going to force bankers to lend to businesses or risk losing their bonuses under his new plans.
Get Sumner Redstone to threaten the banks. Sumner Redstone, you better lend. I'm going to whack you. You better lend or I'm going to kill you. I got this 21-year-old shiksa right here. Yeah, she loves me. I got some Viagra. You better lend or we're going to whack you. It would work. It's good economic policy.
Well, this is similar in a way because he's saying, I'm going to whack you socially. If you don't collect $1 billion bonus this year, you're a nobody, aren't you? You're a peasant if you don't make $1 billion a year.
That's absolutely. But the joke of it all is that no matter how many loans they inject into the system, there's a wall of $20 trillion in bad debt that's going to suck up any liquidity going for the next 5 to 10 years. The deflationary spiral that's causing huge spikes in unemployment and wage deterioration and quality of life collapse in America and Britain and around the world is upon us. No amount of cash injection or loan forcing will change that because these banks colluding with the governments have yet to disclose the full extent of the shadow banking system. Another $20 trillion in bad debt yet to be revealed.
But Max, there is the other side of the equation of deflation is hyperinflation. And Vince Cable could get what he wants, and that might be a collapse of the currency if you cause hyperinflation. Because right now, all of that new money, all that quantitative easing, and remember, the UK has had the most of anybody as on a percentage basis, on a per capita basis. And it's just sitting there on the bank's balance sheet. So if they start lending it out, you could have a Weimar Germany sort of situation.
Well, that's an excellent point. I think people need to get their terms straight. You've got inflation and you've got disinflation. Then you've got deflation versus hyperinflation. Did I say that correct? Yes, I did. So deflation equals hyperinflation. They're two sides of the same coin. Similar inflation and disinflation are, let's say, what Milton Friedman would refer to as the monetary event needed to control prices and price parity and wages in an economy. But we're well past Milton Friedmanism. We're well past neoliberalism. We're well past Barack Obamaism. Remember, Barack Obama is a Chicago school trained economist who believes in Milton Friedmanism, believes in neoliberalism, but we're well past that. We're into Weimar Republic hyperinflation currency collapsism.
Actually, on this, according to the Telegraph in the UK, the biggest book by city bankers in the City of London this year, they're all fighting to get it, and so much that there's so much demand for it that it's at $700 on eBay now. Dying of Money, Lessons of the Great German and American Inflations, which were the hyperinflations and the crises of the Great Depression.
With a forward, of course, from Ben Bernanke. Thanks, Stacy Herbert, for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All righty, we'll be back with a scintillating interview, so don't go away.
Welcome to the future. Seeing double, it's just 3D. Escaped from the cinema and landed in your living room. Shot on special lenses, streamed straight to your stereo display.
The light.
No glasses, no problem. Projections from the world of 3D on Technology Update here on RT. We've got the future covered.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to New York City and speak with Michael Krieger, fund manager and financial writer. Michael, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
It's great to be back, Max and Stacy. Thank you for having me.
All right, Michael, the most important question, the one that's on everyone's lips, news that Goldman Sachs is going to make a movie about itself. Who do you think should play Lloyd Blankfein in Goldman, the movie?
Well, that's interesting. I wonder if I don't think they've been making any more Lord of the Rings lately, so we should try to see if Gollum is available for that part, because I couldn't think of a better character to play Lloyd Blankfein.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Of course, they couldn't use a golden ring. They'd have to use a fiat currency collateralized golden ring debt obligation note, but it would kind of be similar.
It's a creature devoid of all soul whatsoever as well, so that would work.
All right. Now, Michael Krieger, you recently traveled across the entire U.S. Where did you go? What did you see? What's the real situation out there in the nation?
Yeah, sure. So what I really tried to do on this trip was I avoided all coasts essentially. I went to the middle of the country, to the places that a lot of might seem random to a lot of people, to really get a sense of what's out there. Considering I grew up in New York City, I live in New York City now, and what I really found really sort of shocked me in the sense that I always knew that New York City was a bubble unto itself and very different and unique. But what I didn't realize was how absurd it is and how ridiculous it was. And that's really that's one of the major takeaways that I had from traveling across the country. What I noticed was, what I kept reflecting upon was the things that people, the drive people in, let's say, a place like New York City and Washington, D.C., and those things seem to be, to me, power, money, ego, the things that do tend to drive humanity in a lot of ways. However, when taken to an extreme, you get the sort of society that we have today, which I think pervades itself in New York City and Washington, D.C. And what I found across the country that I visited, the areas that I went, was a lack of obsession with those three things. And so I really felt that the rest of the country, having suffered already through the Bush years, they've adjusted to, I think, what reality is a lot better than New York City. And New York City seems to me the most detached from reality place in the country.
You recently sent an email that we posted on our site, The Dangers of a Failed Presidency. Tell us, how is Obama a failed president, and what are those dangers which you refer to?
What I meant to say was Obama is a smaller part of what's a larger failure, right, which is a failure of the United States economic model and essentially the United States empire. But what I actually think is good about Obama's failure is that if John McCain, for example, had been elected president, no one would have had the hope, right, and optimism that people had with Obama. So someone like me, who's an independent that voted for Obama, my hopes and ideas had completely been dashed. So the salesman essentially has failed. The salesman of this economic empire that the United States has, that he was supposed to give people confidence in or transition us into something else. And the fact that he has failed so spectacularly, I think, has taken the establishment off guard. And that's what I mean by the dangers. So you have an establishment that's in power, corporate, media, financial, and bureaucratic establishment, or elite, as you can call it. And they are essentially panicking right now because the American people do not have faith in their executive, judicial, or legislative branches at this point. And Obama sort of characterizes that in its most profound manner. And so what I think the elite, or let's say the administration, is going to need to do is create another enemy. So if the United States population views their own government suspiciously, they're going to need to distract attention away from that in some other manner. So that's what I really mean by the dangers. That the oldest trick in the book, essentially, getting people to hate something else as a distraction away from your own government, is what I think is a tactic that will be employed one way or the other.
All right. So you're saying that, from your observation traveling around the U.S., that the confidence in Barack Obama is collapsed, and the folks out there in Middle America are ready to look for some new direction. But are they just going to fall into the same right-left trap, which is basically constructed by the corporations to keep people in debt and up to their eyeballs with media that's put out there by the likes of Sumner Redstone, which is just propaganda for these corporations? And what direction are they going to go into? The same dead end, or are they going to take a new direction?
I think it's going to take a new direction, but what I found was I met people in virtually every state I was, from all walks of life, and I met people that were, had campaigned aggressively for Bill Clinton, for example, and then I met people that lived in southern Louisiana that were traditionally very, conservative Republicans. And what I found from particularly people closer to my generation, which it would be in like their 30s, is this idea that this Democrat-Republican two-party facade is a relic, actually, is an invention of our parents' generation. I do not find people of my generation associating strongly with Republican or Democrat. I've actually never felt that way. There was more of an apathy from my generation, but what I see now, what someone even said to me, who was a small business owner that I met in Salt Lake City, who was from actually Southern California, He told me, he said, we need a party for our generation. We need a third party. So clearly, I think this desire for a third party, for something new, for something that represents the values or where we want to take this thing from my generation is very much there. I think executing is the difficulty. Just look at Peter Schiff, for example, who's trying to run. He's trying to run as a Republican, but the guy can't get on TV, and basically the mainstream media is pretending he's not running. So the establishment is very, very strongly fighting a potential third party or new political movement, but the desire is absolutely there, in my opinion. I do not see people polarizing, actually, into Democrats, Republicans. I see confusion, but a desire for actually, let's say, a progressive party. That's the word I actually like to use. We need to figure out certain things that we can all agree on as progressives, let's say. And I have some ideas on that, and then take it from there.
Yeah, but Michael Krieger, I don't know if you saw this report that came out from the Washington Post last week. It's called Top Secret America.
Yeah.
They talk about 2,000 corporations in the new information industrial complex. You've got companies like Google. Mm-hmm. You've got companies like Oracle. They control the information. They control the information flow. They're effectively spying on every single American who interacts with Google or the Oracle database. And anytime anyone gets anywhere in the way of this corporate agenda, which is corporate genocide for profit, then they get deleted. You know, on Facebook, there were 80,000 people who were trying to stage a boycott against BP, and Facebook simply deleted it. Now, how do you overcome the fact you've got an entrenched oligopoly of information technology companies that control the system? How are you going to effectively, Michael Krieger, yes or no? The right to assemble, a fundamental right of every American, has been overturned by these technology companies, yes or no?
Yes, but here's the thing. I think this battle will be won by, let's say, people on our side. And I think through alternative media, which is what you're doing, that's one avenue, which I see as being extremely productive. But the other is this, is that everybody in every single day they live their lives makes choices, right? They choose where to have their money. What bank do they have their money in? They choose what to buy, what to eat, and sometimes people don't have these choices, but a lot of people do have choices. So in other words, I think that the rallying cry that I would say, and you can make this through the alternative media, is, okay, well, protests in the street don't do any good because they'll put out police state thugs or demonize you or whatever. That's not the direction we want to go in. I think we do need to go in a sort of 21st century direction. And what that means is this sort of, I'm going to write about this in the future, but it's this idea of conscious capitalism, right? Which is essentially you need to think every single day what you're doing, what you're spending your dollar on. And if you do that and you adjust your life and everyone does that, the whole thing will crumble. So in other words, if people decide not to buy the $200 Coach bag, but decide to buy a $100 handmade bag made by their neighbor's daughter, let's say, that the world will change if everyone does that. I truly do believe that. Because, and the same thing goes for gold, as we've discussed. So refuse to use their money, refuse to buy the corporate products, and think about where you have your money, what bank you have your money in. I have what money I have in the bank is not in one of the big U.S. banks, and that's a conscious decision. And I think that if people make those sorts of choices, the structure has nowhere to go but fall, collapse on itself.
Well, there's no appetite and there's no incentive for social justice in America. If anything, there's a rise of the ideologues who are vilifying and scapegoating minorities like the Mexicans who are coming in over the border. And you see the rise of fascism a lot faster than you're seeing the rise of any progressive party. But let's move on to financial reform for a second. Barack Obama signing the bill for financial reform, he said, quote, "Because of this law, the American people will never again be asked to foot the bill for Wall Street's mistakes." Your thoughts, Michael Krieger?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's more propaganda. If you really take a step back and think about, what they're passing and what's been done since this crisis and what hasn't been done, then you can see the bigger picture. For example, who's gone to jail? I mean, this was one of the biggest criminal acts, financial coup d'etats, as you've mentioned, the United States or the world has ever seen on a global scale. And the instrumental players in this process are walking around free with all their money. It's preposterous. So I mean that's how I look at this. And then they pass these bills that are extremely complicated that the lobbyists are involved in writing. And so what ends up happening is you just create more confusion, more fear, more uncertainty, and the people that actually created the crisis go free with all their money and move on with their lives. So it's to me just a distraction to keep people's eyes off the ball. In a similar vein, for example, audit the Fed bill. Remember that? Had over 300 co-sponsors in the House, had over 30 co-sponsors in the Senate. The thing just evaporated, and now this bill gives the Fed more power. And the amazing thing is, if you watched any of the hearings last week, it was embarrassing. Our Congress people were basically telling Bernanke how great it was that they actually survived, the Fed actually survived independent and with more power. So that's what I think people need to understand, that there's a corporate, military, financial elite that creates policy, pushes through policy, and that is just further evident in this bill as far as I'm concerned. It's keeping people distracted, keeping people away from the real issues and the real perpetrators of crime.
Well, in the bill, there's the provisions for a financial consumer watchdog agency. Elizabeth Warren's name has been bandied about. Clearly, if the American people wanted to relieve themselves from being victimized by financial terrorists, they would put William K. Black in that position. He put over 1,000 bankers in jail after the S&L crisis, and you'd get rid of some of these opportunistic financial terrorists that are stealing your money. But I'm not convinced that the average American is truly seeking freedom from this. I think they at this point, they've got now a taste of what it's like to be subjected to this kind of tyranny, and I think they like it. Well, anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Michael Krieger, thanks again for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max and Stacy. Appreciate it. All
righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.